You're listening to Veterans for Recovery, a podcast that unpacks all things recovery within our extended military family. Join your host, retired Major John Donovan, a noted author, lecturer, and person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, as he and his guests will break down current trending topics and research, along with all things recovery related to increasing recovery resilience and recovery capital within our veteran and service member communities. Now here's your host, Major John Donovan.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Veterans for Recovery. This is a podcast that looks at all things pertaining to our veterans, service members, and their family members who are in recovery or seeking recovery. I'm John Donovan, a retired major of the U.S. Army, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. With me today is my guest, Mike. Today, Mike and I will explore what recovery means, how it impacts our lives, and specifically, a very interesting tool that Mike uses to help others complete, expand, and enhance their recovery process. Mike, welcome to the show, and thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, John.
So to get things rolling, let's talk a little bit about your background, your education, your profession. You are now retired, but what did you do for a living when you were in the working force?
I'll go way back to when I caddied at a golf course back in the 50s, and I watched the gentleman that was in charge of the maintenance on the golf course was intrigued with how that all unfolded. So in 1967, I went out to Penn State. They had a 2-year course in turf grass management, which gave me all the tools to the sciences behind turf grass, the directions that you wanted to go to make a nice golf course. And from that point on, I became a golf course superintendent. And I graduated from Penn State in 1968.
So you spent an entire career working in a field that I enjoy very much, which is golf. And then you also play too.
Yes.
So what was it like did you play prior to the course, or was it through your work that you got interested in the game?
It was through the interest I got interested when I started working it. When I was young, all I wanted to do was drink beer, drive fast cars, and chase girls. And golf really didn't fit into that until a little bit later on.
I see. Well, that's a great segue into some of your recovery story. So you became a golf course superintendent, and then somehow you worked in the magic elixir, the very thing that those who like to listen to this podcast can relate to, which is a destructive relationship, albeit loving relationship with alcohol. Tell us a little bit about your journey from alcoholism into recovery.
Started drinking at a young age, and I was a blackout drinker from the very get-go. That progressed through high school into college, and I had times when I didn't drink at all. I mean, I don't. When I was in college, it was you had to be 21 to get into a bar. I wasn't 21, so there was many months in there, maybe even a year, that I didn't drink. I really didn't start my full-fledged drinking career until after I graduated and got my first job as a golf course superintendent, and well, actually probably as an assistant superintendent. And I was quite the drinker then. I wasn't necessarily a blackout drinker at that time. And as time progressed, I just continued with my drinking. It was just part of my life. My first marriage was to a woman that, God bless her, she's deceased now. But she also liked to, she and I were drinking partners, let's say. And that marriage lasted for about 17 and a half years. I have 2 lovely children from that marriage. And it was interesting to me as I look back on it now, is that the more I got out of the golf course maintenance end of it in 1973 and became a turf grass salesman for a company. I sold seed fertilizer and pesticides to golf courses. And the higher my income, the better life that we had. The drinking just increased right along with it until 1984 when she and I divorced.
So, through your journey into alcoholism, destructive drinking, uh, you found kind of a soulmate in that, somebody who was by your side, somebody who was drinking with you. Uh, that's kind of a common denominator that we often see with couples. Uh, One where somebody has a drinking problem and they seek out a partner who has also a drinking problem. In your recovery journey, have you found other couples like that?
Oh, many, many, many. Yes, without a doubt, it's quite common. I don't know. I'm not going to give you a percentage as to how many. I would say there's probably 20% of the people that I've ran across in my recovery that were married to an alcoholic also. Otherwise, it was they were the alcoholic, and uh, the family fell apart because of the alcoholism of that one individual.
So you and she eventually divorced, and alcohol was the underlying factor for that. Where did your recovery or your recovery journey on the journey to recovery go from there?
It took about 5 years, and I remarried. And I remarried a normie, as you and I call him. She didn't drink. She doesn't drink. We're still married today. And I realized that all of the drama that had been in my life prior to that, my second marriage, I brought forward. I had a real epiphany one day that, my God, we're arguing, I'm screaming, and she's calm. And I couldn't figure that out for a few minutes. And then I realized that I was bringing all my baggage into that marriage, which, if there's anybody listening that is going to get remarried, make sure that you've gotten rid of all the crap that you had in the first one, or you're going to just duplicate it in the second one. As I've heard a good friend of mine say, your picker's broken. So, as I think we were into our marriage a little over a year or a little less, I can't remember. It was about a year that we were into the marriage, and I had an old gas powered refrigerator in my basement. I bought the house before we got married. I had an 8-gallon barrel of beer in there that I had a standing order at the liquor store. Every 3 weeks, I needed a new one. Now, that's not a lot, but I traveled half of my time. So I was only home, just half the time, and then in the weekends. And one weekend, a friend of mine, his wife, came to St. Cloud, where I live, up from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this guy and I were drinking buddies from high school. And when we got together, it was nothing but full bore. Let's get drunk. Let's get wild. And my present wife wanted no part of that. She locked herself in the bedroom. And the three of us, we were smoking weed and we were drinking. And 5 o'clock on that Sunday morning, I woke up on my kitchen floor, not knowing how I had gotten there. I crawled into another part of the house and I saw my friend and his wife asleep in another room. I woke up again about 10 o'clock in the morning. They were gone. The bedroom door was still closed. I went and knocked on the door, and my present wife walked out with a suitcase in each hand, and I knew what was coming. So I carried her suitcase. I think I carried him. I may not have. I was such a selfish, self-centered individual. Anyway, we went out to her car in the back of the house. And I don't even remember if I said goodbye, John. But as I turned around and started walking back to the house, that was the first real God experience or epiphany I had that there was a God, when this audible voice to me said, "This is going to be your second marriage in less than 5 years, and the common denominator is not the women." And I realized the common denominator was the alcohol. Then I went into the house for the rest of the day and I tried to figure out now listen to me, how I was going to fix my problem. the same mind that got me there was going to try to solve this new dilemma that I figured I was going to have to work out. A couple of years after that, I got involved in AA, and I've been sober since August 21st of 1988. So I've got 35, almost 36 years of sobriety, uninterrupted, and my life has gotten nothing but better in all those years.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And your recovery journey, the slide into alcoholism, the disillusionment of your first marriage and nearly the second marriage. And then you hear this voice telling you that the common denominator in all of this is alcohol. But I think later on in your recovery journey is you also discovered the common denominator was you.
Right.
After all, our problems were of our own making, right? The bottles were only symbols.
Yes.
And so we discover this, that uh, we've got this problem, and the problem has manifested itself through drinking. But when we sober up, we find that many of those problems are still there. Our way of looking at life, our irrational thoughts, anger management, selfishness, uh, fear, other character defects. And I want to talk a little bit about a way that you have discovered about addressing those problems. And you do some really unique, I call it ministry, others might call it service work, but with people who are justice involved, incarcerated. You started doing this work some time ago in a prison in southern Minnesota, and that work continues today. But can you tell us about the program that you were facilitating in southern Minnesota with some of the justice involved individuals down there?
I got involved. I had a sponsor that was extremely service oriented. And he told me in 1995, or he actually asked me if I wanted to take my spiritual life to another level. Not knowing exactly what he was talking about, I said yes. And he told me about this 3-day Christian retreat. It's called TEC, Together's Encounter Christ. And he said the first thing they do is they take your keys and your watch away from you when you walk in the door, and then you're going to be there for 3 days. And I thought, well, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to take an extra set of keys and I'm going to take a spare watch. I'm going to stay in control as much as I can. But I did that 3-day retreat. And on the third day, there was without a doubt my higher power and I became aligned, my God. And as I left that retreat, I out loud, I said to my God, whatever you want me to do, I will follow, I will do. And that led to a prison ministry that my sponsor was also involved in. That basically was the same program, but instead of 3 days, it was 2 days. And we started doing that. When I say we, my wife got involved a year after I did. I think we got involved in that about 1987. Yeah, it was about 1997 is when we became involved in it. And we worked in that prison or prisons and jails around the state of Minnesota. Those were 2-day retreats. We did that for over 26 years until COVID came along and it was cut off. But that was without a doubt the most gratifying service work I've ever done. Now that I'll carry it forward a few years, then later on, I was still doing that ministry, and right up until COVID, the community that I live in had no workshops whatsoever. They would have conferences or they'd have roundups. And I had a friend that I still have him. He's a good friend of mine, was involved in a Joe and Charlie 4-step workshop down in the metropolitan area of Minnesota. And he came up and guided me through the process for a couple of years. We did it spring and fall for a couple of years, and then he and his friend left, and I have carried that on on my own now. We're just now starting my 14th year in it.
Wow, that is incredible, Mike. And I want to unpackage that a little bit more. So for people who tune in and listen to this, they may be wondering, well, John, this is a program called Veterans for Recovery, and we're talking to a guy here who's done ministry in the prisons and was a golf course superintendent and then a salesperson for golf course fertilizer. And what the heck has this got to do with veterans in recovery? And the answer is really quite simple. What Mike is talking about is one, faith-based recovery. Faith-based being a belief in a higher power that Mike chooses to call God, but a belief in a power greater than ourself, which many of us have found as a most beneficial, probably the most important tool in recovery. But then through Mike's service work, he has found another tool that he has used with both the prison population and just folks in recovery in general. And that is this fourth and fifth step workshop. So to our veterans in recovery who may be listening to this is important stuff. This is important stuff that will build your recovery capital, that will build your recovery resiliency, and gives you important tools for recovery, and not just for yourself, but to pass on to your battle buddies. So Mike, unpackage this a little bit for us. What is this fourth and fifth step workshop, and how does it work?
The situation is this, that I have to go out and find a facility that I can book for 6 weeks in a row. I do it on Monday nights. So it's changed spots over the years, but I usually find a church. They're pretty easy to deal with, and they don't charge you a lot of rent, because this is all this is not AA finance. This is Mike finance, and that's okay. So I find a church. I get the dates lined up. I print up a lot of flyers to put around the community to let it know that it's going on, advertise it on Facebook. If you remember a statement that I made earlier on about your picker is broken, or you have to unpackage all the drama and the dysfunction you brought from your first marriage or your childhood, whatever, into your marriage, and how things start to fall apart. Well, the fourth step in Alcoholics Anonymous is stated like this: we make a searching and moral inventory of ourselves. And the way the process works, the way the step works, is we have this is all printed out for everybody that comes. We have sheets for resentments, sheets for fears, and then sexual misconduct and harms done to others. And it's in the process, the people that are attending the workshop, we have the way the paperwork is laid out. You name the resentment, the fear, the harm, what caused it, and then you go across the sheets. And how did it affect your social life? How did it affect your finances? How did it affect your sex lives? How did this alcoholism or whatever addiction you're involved in, how did this affect you that way? And then there's a column 4, which is the real coup de grace, if you will. So the column 4 in it is, what part did I play in these resentments, fears, harms done to others? Because if I don't own my own stuff, if I don't own the part that I played in it, I will continue to blame other people, places, and things, and I will remain a victim. And victims, whether you're a veteran or whether you're a normie like me or a non-veteran, it doesn't make any difference. If I remain a victim, I'm not going to recover, because I will always have an opportunity to blame other people, places, and things. I've got to get rid of that, or I'm not going to maintain good sobriety. Then the step after that in Alcoholics Anonymous is the fifth step, is when you make you admit to God, to yourself, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, not theirs, but ours. And we sit down with I sat down with my sponsor, or people sit down with me, and we'll go through those sheets box by box, check mark by check mark. It typically takes anywhere from 2 to 10 hours, depending upon how deep and articulate the person is, to go through that process. And then on the other side of that, then now you take ownership. you realize what your part is. You can't get rid of it, because if you could have, you would have. So now it's a process of step 6 is you're ready to have God remove all these character defects. And step 7 is you ask God or your higher power, whichever it may be, if he would remove these character defects. And he will. I say he because my God is he. Your higher power will remove them. But the interesting thing is it's on his timeline and not mine. I want it to be done yesterday, and that's not necessarily the way it's going to work. The steps after that are quite unique too. You make a list of all the people that you have harmed and are willing to make amends to them, and then you make the amends. And then from that point on, it's a daily and a spiritual contact with your higher power. And you're off. I can speak for myself. My life has changed immensely since that happened. And that's, I work with it. I sponsor a lot of people. I do that workshop for the public in St. Cloud where I live. We do it in the spring, we do it in the fall. And then just after COVID was over, we could not get back into the prisons that we used to take AA into. And just as I'll tell you what, I call them God dots. I had a couple of God dots going for me, and I was able to hook up with a counselor that runs a recovery program in the St. Cloud prison. And as the program was that he said, whatever you want to do. So I thought what we would do is we would read through the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, step by step, page by page. And we came to step 4. I kind of had this, I'll call it, I had this real epiphany. I thought, well, I wonder if this guy would give me the latitude to be able to bring this printed material that I have into the prison, and the people that are coming to this AA meetings, and there's about 15 of them that usually show up each week, if I could take them through this process. And he was all for it. And then a week later, I thought to myself, well, as long as this guy has given me this much latitude, I wonder if he'd give me the opportunity to myself, and I have 3 other friends that are involved in it, if we could hear their 5th steps, which typically is done by the chaplain of the prison. And I was able to explain to him that the way the process works, it would be more beneficial for the inmate to do his 5th step with one of us on the outside, because we understand the process, where the chaplain, not that they're not equipped, but they would not be equipped as well as we are, having worked with the entire process. So that is my latest venture. We've been going into the St. Cloud prison now since October, once a week.
Mike, that is incredible stuff. And it occurs to me, in fact, I was just saying to somebody recently, this story of Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, in May of 1935. He had sobered up in December of 34 and had been working with chronic alcoholics in the 5 boroughs of New York. Really, really tough cases. And he comes home one afternoon, and his wife Lois is there, and she can see he's just utterly dejected. And she looks at him and says, "Bill, what's wrong?" And he says, I've worked with drunks for the last 6 months now, and not a one of them is sober. And she looks him in the eye and she says, "Yes, but you are. Yes, but you are." And it hits him. That's how I keep this thing. I keep it by giving it away. And if somebody else gets sober as a result of it, that's great. But by the mere fact of giving it away and working with others, I stay sober. It sounds like your program is really based in that service mentality. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Interestingly enough, this morning I went over to the prison to do a 5th step with an individual. Now, he's been through the process, but we never know, unless we're sitting there with them, exactly what they're doing. And I went in there with the expectation that he had done all the paperwork, and we were going to sit down and discuss this paperwork. And as it turns out, the gentleman didn't do any of it, but he read me a 2.5-page letter as to what the things that he had done and what he's sorry for. That works in some cases, but it wasn't what I expected. So I worked as best I could with him for a little over an hour. I'm going to see him again Tuesday night. And when I'm coming home, I'm thinking to myself, geez, that was not a waste, but an extreme disappointment. And then just like you said, Mike, are you still sober? Yes, I am. So that's what, and somewhere along the line, I don't know where, or I don't know when, something will click with that guy and he'll remember something. He's putting some tools in a toolbox here. Now, maybe not the ones I wanted to see him use, but I have no control over that.
Well, and you make a very good point, and it's just about time for us to wrap this up. But one of the things for our listeners to consider is you never know the impact you'll have on another person. And I can't tell you how many times in my recovery journey, I'm sure this has happened to you. Somebody will come up to me and there's like, oh, yeah, you said something in a meeting a couple years ago. And I have no recollection of it whatsoever. No, and they'll say, and that really stuck with me. And I have thought so much about that. And it has really given me a different attitude, or I've looked at things differently. And it turns out that whatever I said had an impact in their life, and I'm oblivious to it. And so too with this young man in the prison that you spoke to today. As you're listening to his fifth step, there may be things that are impacting him in ways and means that we're just not cognizant of, that we can't see those internal workings. But 2 or 3 years down the road, he's speaking at some lectern, the featured speaker of the month, and he's going to say, this guy, Mike, came into the prison and heard my fifth step, and it forever changed me. Mike, your closing thoughts for the audience today, anything that you would like to impart on our listeners?
As I listen to just those statements or that little conversation there, John, I have to have my A game on all the time. And what do I mean about my A game? I'm not going to go around with an F-bomb with this and an F-bomb with that and criticizing a person. I try to, and I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna here. I'm a big boy. I'm 76 years old. But I'm going to try to influence people with positive stuff, not with the negative side.
Well said. And I think many of our veterans understand that. This idea of, well, we call it in the military a can-do attitude. And in AA, they might say an attitude of gratitude. If I have an attitude of gratitude, I will behave gratefully. My actions are a direct result of my thoughts. And if I'm exuding positive energy, if I'm speaking in the positive, I represent what recovery is and what recovery can be. Mike, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show with us today. Greatly appreciate you and the work that you are doing with others who are on their recovery journey.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us and listening to our program today. Mike, it was a fascinating conversation. To our listeners, thank you for spending a little time with us and learning more about Veterans for Recovery. This has been a podcast of the Coming Home Well Network. Until next time, be well, think well, and do well. This is Major John Donovan signing off.
You've been listening to Veterans for Recovery, a Coming Home Well podcast. We value your feedback. Please be sure to leave a review. Share and download this episode. We thank our veterans and service members for your service to our country. We thank our friends and families for their support. And thank you for listening to Veterans for Recovery.